Okay, so my name is James, and I am one of the staff attorneys here at Project Citizenship. So you might have just come from the part one video on the workshop basics. So this is going to be the part two for app assistance volunteers, and it's really just going to focus on completing the N400, what that looks like, and then what are sort of the next steps for each applicant after the workshop. So we're going to jump right into the application here. So this is the very first question on the form. It's a little bit confusing, but I think really the important thing to know here is that the vast majority of people are checking A. So A is for that 5-year eligibility. Again, that's what most people are applying through. It's possible that some folks might be applying through their U.S. citizen spouse. That would be box B. And again, that's pre-screened for, so that would be noted on your on sort of the file, before you get it. Anything else listed here would be very rare, and there would be a note for it. We might even actually come over to you to talk about it at the workshop. So it looks kind of big and scary, but really it's going to be most likely A, maybe B, and if it is anything other than A, don't worry, it'll be well noted. Actually, I want to go back really quick. So if you look at the top right, you'll see enter your 9-digit A number. That's that number that's on the green card. So you do have to manually enter it on every page, unfortunately. Um, but just be aware, it does start right at the top of the first page. So more information about the applicant. So the very next question starts part two, and we're looking for the current legal name. So that's going to be the name that's on the birth certificate or the driver's license or the passport. Be aware that the name on the green card is not proof of legal name. So, you'll often see things like misspellings or abbreviations. That's okay, but just be aware that it's not proof of legal name. So if there is some sort of different name or the name is altered in some way, feel free to put it down in number two. You can see other names you've used since birth. So this is a place for nicknames, aliases, maiden names, things like that. But also, hey, was your name spelled wrong on your green card? That could be a good place for it as well. So also, every time you apply for citizenship, it's a chance to change your name legally. So if you are approved, it'll have to go before a judge. Sort of on the back end, that's not something you really have to worry about. But you can change your name legally, which is really cool. So if you'd like to do that, you just have to check yes and then add that in. And then also be aware that this wouldn't be something that would happen until the very last step of the process. So if the applicant is unsure or they're really sure now, but they might not be sure later, um, they can change it later. It's not a big deal. The officer will ask them about it, and they can make the final decision at that point. So, just some continued information here required about the applicant. So, online account number is number 4. We don't fill that in usually. It's possible that there is an online account number from a previous application, but we don't need it for this purpose. Um, so, gender identity, date of birth, date the applicant became a permanent resident. That's on the green card. Country of birth, and then also country of citizenship or nationality. So there are some questions about, or just one question actually, about parents. So this might seem a little bit out of place. Really, it's getting at whether um, the applicant might have already derived citizenship from a parent, which would trigger a different process. So that's really what that's looking at. So if you are checking yes to this question, flag one of us down and we can maybe have that conversation with the applicant. So medical disability waiver, this is another question that can come up at the workshop. So there are some cases where, because of one or more medical conditions, the applicant just wouldn't be able to pass the English or civics exam. That's okay. In that case, what we'd have to do is get a medical waiver from their doctor. This can be a tricky process. It takes some time. We rarely get a sufficient one on the first go around, and so there can be some back and forth. But be aware this is something that happens before the workshop, and so we'd already have this all completed. Or this is a conversation that's just coming up now for the first time. And so if there is somebody who's saying, "Well, I don't have one of these things, but I feel like maybe I would qualify," um, or maybe there's a family member there who knows for a fact, "Hey, listen, we were just at the doctor. There's a few different conditions. I think that's totally fine. You can make a note of it, and we'll have that conversation, and we can sort of work on that form after the workshop." So yeah, at the bottom it says, if a client informs you that they have a disability that prevents them from learning English or civics, and it's not marked, alert a captain. Exactly right. So Social Security update. So this is a new thing on this version of the form. Previously, if you did become a citizen, it was up to you to update Social Security on your new status. So this would make it so if you check yes to this, you can have USCIS do it for you. So it's pretty simple. You just have to check yes to both 12A and 12C, and then also include the applicant's social in 12B. So pretty simple. It's optional. You don't have to do it, but I might recommend it just because it makes it easier for the applicant. So residence information. So we do have to list everywhere the applicant has lived in the last 5 years. We're starting with the current residence first, so that's why that's sort of laid out a little differently. And then from there, we're just working our way backwards. So we're going back 5 years, could be 3 years if we're applying based on marriage. Again, you'd know that ahead of time. Um, we want to avoid gaps in the timeline. So if you're noticing there's a couple months between two addresses, right? Because it does ask for the dates of residence. Maybe ask, were you living anywhere at that point? If they weren't, that's okay. We just want to make sure that we have maybe a separate slot for that 3-month gap or whatever it might be. You don't need the 9-digit zip code, so just be aware you don't need to list that full 9-digit zip code. Oops. Okay. Oh, also, approximate dates are usually good enough. So if someone doesn't know the exact day they moved, that's fine. We can just put, May 2024, whatever it happens to be. So biographic information, this is pretty self-explanatory. I just want to note that sometimes there's an issue with question two. So the common scenario is someone will say they'll check off Hispanic or Latino for question one on ethnicity, get to question two and go, hold on a second, I don't really feel like any of these fit me. And that's okay. So if at any point someone doesn't feel like, these fit fit them, that's fine. What we'll do is just leave it blank. So we often do leave that second question blank, and that hasn't caused any problems yet. So just be aware of that. So marital history, this is if you filled out an application before, this section has sort of been greatly simplified. Um, First thing to note, there's no legal separation in Massachusetts. So if somebody is saying they're separated, they're likely still married, or maybe divorced, but they're definitely not legally separated because that's not a thing in Massachusetts. It could be possible that they were legally separated in a different state. So inquire about that if they are saying separated. But if it's in Mass, they're likely not actually separated. So if you're applying based on the 5 years here, you're actually just checking your marital status, if you are married, whether they're in the U.S. Armed Forces, and then also how many times you've been married total. But that's really it. You don't have to include any other information about your spouse or your prior spouses or their prior spouses, which, again, if you filled out one of these in the past, that was sort of a pain. And it didn't really make sense too. Like, why am I filling it out for this third person. Um, but anyway, if you are applying based on marriage, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky because you would include your current spouse's information, right? Because that's who you're applying through. So it's pretty straightforward. It's asking their name, date of birth, um, their date of marriage. Do they live with you, right? Because that's important. Um, it's an important part of eligibility. So if you are applying based on marriage and you're not actually living together, that could mean that you have to wait the 5 years. So when did your spouse become a citizen? You know, or excuse me, how did they become a citizen? And then when did they become a citizen? All of that information we'll need to fill out for USCIS. And if you have any questions about that, or the applicant doesn't maybe know all this information off the top of their head, feel free to flag one of us down. So information on children. So this is another area that's been simplified in some ways. We're only listing children under the age of 18. So if the applicant only has children over the age of 18, we're writing 0, and we're skipping to the next section. Um, be aware if they do have children under 18, residence is really important. So if they don't live at the same address, USCIS will likely inquire about whether they support their dependents. So we want to make note of where they live. Also, you can see plainly the furthest box to the right is asking very clearly, are you providing support for this child? So we do have to say yes or no to that. Of course, if there's a no, make a note of it on that client info page within the client file, and flag one of us down. So employment information. So this is very similar to residence. We're starting with the current employment and working our way back 5 years, or 3 if applying based on marriage. Again, we're looking for gaps larger than a month, right? So if somebody is saying, my last day was on, May 1st, and then I started my next job in October, that's a pretty big gap, and we want to, know if they had any sort of job in that time. If they didn't, we'd want to list it as unemployed. Also, if the applicant is currently not working, we'd also want to list that as unemployed or retired or whatever it might be. Travel history. So this one is a little bit simplified. You used to have to include the actual like days out of the country. Here we're just looking at the dates. So date you left, date you returned, and then also the countries. We're going back 5 years or 3 years based on marriage. We're starting with the most recent trip. Beware, we do have addenda. So, if someone has a bunch of trips, you might find that you're running out of room quickly. So feel free to grab, an addendum we made for this purpose, so you can keep filling in dates. So if the applicant's unaware, I like to use passport stamps. I think it's I don't want to say easy because it's not easy to read those stamps, but it's certainly the most one of those accurate ways, I think. You can also try to look up their travel history through the CBP website. I've had mixed results with that in the past, so and I wouldn't expect anyone to be doing that in a workshop. Just if you like to, you can go for it. And then again, anything over 6 months, in an individual trip, please flag one of us down, make a note of it for sure. And also, if there's a bunch of little trips that are adding up, so if you see a bunch of little trips that are adding up to years and years, right, in the last 5 years, then that could be a problem as well. So make a note and flag us down. Okay, so good moral character. This is where um, it gets a little bit tricky, and I think where some of the maybe more hidden dangers can come into play. So this is a section where it's essentially asking all these yes or no questions. If any of them are checked no, we want to add an addendum explaining why we're checking, or excuse me, why we're checking yes to this. Um, if you're not sure what to write, that's okay. Just make a note on the client info page. And then just a practice tip, it's helpful to break down and explain some of the complicated questions. So this section does use some of the most legalese, difficult to understand language, and so it's okay if you feel like you need to paraphrase or break down some of the more complicated ones. So false claims to citizenship, this is a big one. So this would be potentially voting. So there's no places currently in Mass that allow non-citizens to vote. That could change soon. I think there is a bill maybe working its way through that could change that. But right now there are no places in Mass. So if an applicant has said they voted, stop the application, alert one of us. We can have a conversation with the applicant. Please write a detailed note on the client info page. Anyone who's registered to vote but did not vote. So that's still bad, but it's less bad because you can get all you have to do is get sort of unregister before you apply for citizenship, and that can sort of cure that. Um, Another thing to note too is that I believe most places, if you don't actually vote within a certain amount of time, you can be purged from the voter registry. So a lot of times when people say they have registered, which usually is through like a high school class, right? Their teacher thought they were doing a great thing and registering them all to vote. But if you're not a citizen, you can't vote. And so, we go to look these things up, and they've already been purged long ago. So, um, but still, it's something that we definitely have to check out and make sure before we apply. Taxes are another good moral character issue. So you can see that the app is asking if they currently owe any overdue taxes. Um, if somebody does owe taxes, that's okay. They just need to be on a payment plan. So it's on them to sort of reach out to the IRS or the DOR if it's Massachusetts and get on the payment plan, and then start making payments. So that's the two things that USCIS will sort of look into, whether you have a plan, and then whether you're actually following up with that plan, making payments. So this other question 4 here is confusing. It's asking, what you're calling yourself on taxes. So did you call yourself a non-resident alien, which would be false. So that's a little bit confusing. That's one that you often have to break down, um, for the applicant. But we did actually look into this. I don't know that there was actually a tax form in the last 10 years or so that where this was actually an option. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to flag us down and we can help explain that too. So some occasional yes answers. So military and police units, usually not a problem, but we do have to explain it. Weapons training, again, usually not a problem. We still need to explain it. Removal proceedings, definitely need to explain it. But I think sometimes these aren't as bad as some people might think at first glance because it's often the case that somebody might get their green card through these proceedings, and so it does come up, but oftentimes it's not. Yeah, it doesn't wind up being a negative thing for them. But if it's not previously noted, definitely make a note of it and definitely flag one of us down, so we can discuss with the applicant. So military training, a quick note on this. So this includes everything from military training, police training, to things like ROTC, right? So be broad when you're answering these questions, and alert one of us if anyone has been involved in military action against a government. Criminal history, this section is a little bit complicated. Um, we we screen all the stuff ahead of time, so we should have a good idea of any crimes that need to be listed here. Um, this is a section that I think if you're hung up on, feel free to just skip and make a note. Because again, we're going to be checking these and making sure we have them filled accurately. And so if you don't feel like you have enough information or the applicant doesn't know enough, then feel free to just sort of make a note and skip it. But it's asking a couple things. It's asking, have you ever, committed, agreed to commit, asked someone else to commit, help commit a crime for which you were not arrested? And then also, have you ever been arrested, cited, detained, confined by any law enforcement officer? And that question is pretty broad. So that would encompass anything from, a moving violation, a speeding ticket, to, a felony charge. So we have to disclose everything even if it was dismissed, even if it was expunged or sealed. And we also have to provide certified copies of dockets or dispositions for all of these charges. So the client info page that you'll have will list all of this stuff in this format of how it's asked. But again, it can be complicated, so feel free to sort of skip over it if you feel like you need to. Um, and you might even actually have pre-reviewed dockets. So if this is something we pre-screened, the dockets may be in that folder. And then finally, any newly disclosed crimes, please, make a super clear and detailed note about, and definitely flag us down because that's something that we'll have to have a conversation about with the applicant. Okay, so just potentially problematic crimes. So again, this would be if somebody is bringing it up for the first time. Drug convictions are taken very seriously by USCIS. Theft or fraud, firearms offenses, crimes of violence, violating a protective order, sex crimes, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and then multiple OUIs in a statutory period. So these are sort of the deadly crimes, right? That can really hurt your eligibility for citizenship. So be aware if someone is bringing up crimes for the first time. Sort of keep this list in the back of your head. Okay, so material misrepresentation. This is a little bit different. This would be sort of like giving. This would be like if you gave a false passport to a government official, right? So it's a really, really big deal if this is being checked, yes. So we want to know as much as possible about it. So here you can see the nature of the lie, the reason for the lie, when and where, because we're going to have to explain this, and it might be that um, we don't feel like there is an appropriate explanation, and we have to maybe refer this applicant out. Um, but at the very least, we need to know the story, right? Selective service, this can be a little bit confusing. So, you know, anyone born a male and under or between 18 and 26 has to register for selective service in the US. So this is sort of how we're filling this out based on a few different things. So if they've registered, right, you'd answer these questions, you'd put in their information. You can see there's a website here at the top. It's pretty easy to find if you just Google selective service, but you can just include things like last name, date of birth, and social, and it'll give you all of the information you need. If they haven't registered and they're under 26, make a note on the client info page because we can register them. That's something we can do if they are under 26. If they're between 26 and 31, make a note of that as well. And then we will have to include the selective service addendum that we've made. Um, the the reason for this sort of odd category is because 26 to 31 would put their failure to register within the last 5 years. So that could be an issue. It sort of gets complicated. It has to be a willful failure to register. But it gets a little bit more complicated. If they're over 31 completely and they haven't registered, we still want to complete that addendum, but it's becomes less of an issue because it's outside of the last 5 years. So it feels complicated, but really there's only a couple options um, here, and you're welcome to flag us down too to explain it as well in the workshop. So the oath of allegiance is pretty much one of the last parts of the application. There's just a couple notes about this. So these are typically something that you do have to say yes to. There's also a copy of the entire oath on the last page of the application, so you can show that to the applicant if they're unfamiliar with it. But really, there's a couple common things that can come up. So, and that's really just willingness to bear arms. So if there is some sort of religious or moral exemption, uh, right? Like, so a common one would be like Jehovah's Witness, right? So if there is a religious exemption or a moral exemption from bearing arms, we can prove that. But we need to prove that it's a deeply held moral ethical code. So that would be like a letter from your place of worship or a passage or something like that. Um, I think if you were to go to the interview and just say, I've never, really liked the military, and I don't really see myself bearing arms. I don't know how successful that would be. I think it would need to be, again, more based on a deeply held moral ethical code, and not just your personal preference. So the final steps, this is where we would get the applicant signature, interpreter information, things like that. Realistically, we're not worried too much about this section. Once we get through oath of allegiance, for the purposes of app assistance, we're pretty much done. But just be aware, if there is an interpreter, so this would be a client with a medical waiver, right? Something like that, you would want to complete that section, or have the interpreter complete it rather. But that's only if there's a valid reason. So, not knowing enough English and needing an interpreter would not be enough for that. Um, and then parts 13 to 16, please do not complete. That's completed at the interview. And yeah, so if the applicant does fill it out, not a big deal. We can white it out, but try not to complete that part of it. So when to ask for help. So if you're having trouble communicating with the client, so maybe they don't speak English and they're not exempt or they don't have a completed medical waiver, flag one of us down and we can have that conversation. If you notice serious eligibility red flag or another urgent question, again, that would be another reason to flag us down. And then also when you're finished, right? So we're going to be bringing people to the next station, which would be quality control. So, there will be a quality control sign for you to sort of hold up, and we will come over and bring that person to the next stop. So what happens after application assistance, right? So like I was just saying, quality control, we're going to have some more volunteers who are attorneys review the application with the applicant. We're also going to discuss payment. And so if the applicant is paying, we'll go over all of that. There's a few different options. So that will be discussed. And then also there's an in-person checkout. So for instance, the applicant will receive a copy of the N400, but will also receive um, study questions, timeline, frequently asked questions, things like that. That'll be helpful for them, as they're sort of waiting for the application to process. So after the workshop, we review all these applications. So that's like our main job afterwards. We're sending the applicant lists of anything they're missing, right? If they need to get us things, maybe documents, maybe information. Regardless, we'll ask them for that and prepare the application. Once we have everything we need, we put it in line to be packaged and mailed. We do mail every application to USCIS, and then we track every application until the applicant is either sworn in as a U.S. citizen or issued some sort of other decision. So, in terms of the process itself, it's pretty broad in terms of the timeline, but we expect 6 to 8 weeks to get some sort of receipt notice for the application. After the 1 month mark, we're looking for the biometrics appointment notice, which would be where they do things like fingerprints and take your photo and run background checks. At the 3 month plus mark, we're looking at potentially an interview with the USCIS officer. They'll determine, eligibility and whether they qualify, but also things like the medical waiver. And then after that would be the oath ceremony. So that's where the applicant would be sworn in. You can see a picture of this person here, right? They're given their certificate, and it's really a beautiful moment for them. So at the interview itself, there are just a few things to note. So this is where the tests are being administered, right? So the civics test, there's 100 questions total, 10 are chosen, and the applicant has to get 6 right. For English, they have to read one sentence in English out of 3 and write one sentence in English out of 3. They also have to be able to speak English enough to keep up with the officer, and if the officer feels like they are unable to, they can end the interview right there. Okay. So thank you so much for sitting through that presentation. I know it could be a little bit boring, but we really, really appreciate it. And so at this point, if you have any questions ahead of the workshop, feel free to email our volunteer account, and we should be able to get everything sorted. But again, thank you so much for choosing to volunteer with Project Citizenship, and I hope you all have a wonderful experience.